All right, I think we're going to get started. How's everyone doing? Have you had a good day so far? Yeah? I'm American. I like interaction. So I know I'm like the only thing between you guys and the keynote and then drinks, so I appreciate that you're all here at the very last part of the day. My name's Julia Doctoroff. I currently work as a senior implementation consultant at Make Positive here in London. And I've worked with Salesforce for about 6 years now. I started on the admin side and recently have been learning to code. So this is kind of my foray into code learning. Hopefully you'll learn a little bit too. So the first thing we're going to talk about is why people might design a solution that includes code. Then I'll go into a little bit of an explanation of what Apex is, and I'll compare it with Process Builder, which is something as admins you're probably familiar with. And then finally, I'll give you guys some resources so you can begin your own coding journey if you're interested in that. So here's a picture of me when I was 22, about to graduate from university with a degree in poetry and creative writing. And it was a really great major. You can ask me about reading some of my really angsty teenage poetry sometime. And I really enjoyed it. But when I had graduated from high school, I had been really interested in math and logic, and I really liked that sort of stuff. But when I had started university, I had to take a placement exam to sort of place where I was going to be in the math program, and I hadn't done very well on it. And I sort of took that as a reason to not continue with that sort of part of my learning. And so I went with humanities, which I really enjoyed, but I always sort of felt like something was a little bit missing. So a few years after I graduated, I found a job as an admin working at a company in San Francisco where I grew up. And I sort of really got into Salesforce and really liked being an admin. And I felt like I was learning lots of things. And my favorite thing was always writing validation rules and formulas and things that were very logic-based. I really liked that. But I felt like the further I went into Salesforce, first as an admin and then in consulting, there would get to be a point on a project where my skills would end. I would have to pull in someone who had sort of more of a coding background. And I felt like often I didn't even understand what I needed to do. Like I didn't know what a batch process was. I didn't know what a trigger was. I didn't even know what the solution was. I just knew that I personally couldn't do it. So I did a program last year called Rad Women Code. It's a really wonderful program for any person that identifies as a woman and has worked as a Salesforce admin for at least a couple of years. And it was a really great program for me because it's an intro to Apex coding, and it was super cool. And it sort of got me to a point where I felt comfortable even doing the developer trailheads because I didn't have the sort of foundation to be able to do those. So it was very positive for me. So why might other people code in Salesforce? I think this was a question I often asked myself, and I wasn't sure how to answer because I just had the admin skill set. So the first one is kind of, sounds like a little bit vague, but anything is possible. It's very true. Like there's limitless possibilities when you're doing code that aren't always possible with configuration, which is not to say configuration is wrong. You just have more options sometimes with code. If you're working with really large data volumes, code can be super helpful because it kind of gives you a lot of control over how your code is going to process a lot of records. You might be working on a project or in an org where there's a lot of existing code, and sometimes people think that having kind of a combination of a lot of declarative automation, so a lot of process builders, a lot of flows, a lot of workflow rules combined with a lot of code that's doing different stuff can sometimes conflict and not be the most clean or best solution. So that's sometimes a decision people decide to make. If you've been working with Salesforce for a little while, you know that sometimes you might be doing a really weird workaround. And you think, OK, this is maybe going to work for this very specific situation. But I kind of feel like maybe in 2 weeks, I'm going to get an email from someone saying, like, I can't do my job because of whatever you built. And that's kind of in the back of your mind, being like, OK, this might fix it today, but not later. So you might want to have a solution that you kind of have a bit more control over. This was the one that I came across the most, which was that you don't have a configuration option. You just simply cannot do what you're trying to do without code. So that was sort of a roadblock I would get to a lot. And then finally, because I'm American, I like fun. It is really fun to, I know, good joke, right? It's fun to have code that works. It's fun to build something that works, and that's super gratifying. So what is Apex code? So I really like that image. It extends Salesforce, so it allows you to do things that you might not be able to do with declarative customization. It's an object-oriented programming language. So I've spoken to people who studied computer science at university, and they said that they might have spent an entire few weeks or months discussing this topic. So I'm not going to go into it, because we have 20 minutes right now. And I'll say that it means that everything you're working with in Apex is an object. So classes are an object, triggers are an object, and they work together. So it works with standard and custom objects that you might be used to from being an admin in Salesforce. And one thing I will say about that is I don't think you should discount the fact that you've worked with as an admin for a while. I think it gives you a foundation so that you can understand what kind of automation is possible. You can understand what the data model is, and you can really understand and have that foundation to begin to learn to code. And then finally, it's only used with Salesforce. So this is kind of our introduction to Apex. So we're going to be talking about triggers now. And I'm going to be comparing a process builder and a trigger that do the same thing. So first, let's talk about what triggers are. So they listen for events in Salesforce. And these events can either be before or after an event. And these types of events, you can see, give you a lot more possibilities than you would with process builder or a workflow rule. Like, for example, you could do some really complex validation before a record is deleted that references a lot of different objects, just something you cannot do without a trigger. And they're related to a single object. And I've heard people say that process builders should also be related to a single object, because if you think about it, let's say you have 4 process builders on case, and you can't really control the order that those are going to fire in. The same thing would be true for a trigger, and that's why it's a best practice to have 1 trigger per object. And then finally, they basically are running off a certain event happening, and when this event happens, you want your code to run, and that code will have all of your business logic that you're trying to create. So our use case today goes back to San Francisco in the 90s, which was my favorite time. And I played with this toy called a Skip It. Did anyone ever play with that? Yeah? So it's a toy. You never played with it, Stacy? No. I'm going to explain it right now. So it's a toy that you jump over, and every time you jump over it, it counts a rotation. And it sounds like a really safe toy, right? So my sister, yeah, it's kind of like an early predecessor to Fitbit, I think, for children. My sister, Micah, broke her foot on this toy. And it was a bummer. And because it's my family, we complained to Skip It. So I'm going to now, I'm going to want to sit on this. I'll just perch. So I'm going to show you the data model that I've created. So we have Skip It toy in here. And I have other toys because I love toys, if you want to look at the list of toys. Another favorite of mine was Polly Pocket. My mom still has all of my Polly Pockets. So Skip It. So we want to capture information about the particular toy. And then when somebody creates a case related to this toy, we want the toy owner, in this case, Luke Perry, to get a task notification letting them know that maybe their toy isn't so safe and they really need to action that to make sure that they're creating toys that are safe for children. So the first thing that I've done in here, where is my other tab? I'll just go into the... Huh? Maybe. I originally had me as the owner, and then I was like, I don't want to be the owner. So we're going to go and look at the process builder I've created. Fire drill.
May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? The public address and fire alarm systems are about to be tested. The fire alert signal will first sound, followed by the fire evacuation signal. Please take no further action.
Huh? I don't know how long it's going to be. I knew it was going to happen, though. Okay.
The test is now complete.
Thank you.
If you had difficulty in clearly hearing messages or fire alarm signals, please advise main reception. Thank you for your cooperation.
Fun times. Okay, so we're very safe now. So this is the process builder that I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail in because it's not very complicated. It's basically saying when a case is created and it has a toy related to it, then create a task for the toy owner. And we're going to include information about both the toy, the case, and information that we're going to set on the task itself. So none of this, if you've seen Process Builder before, is that complicated. Now we're going to do the same thing in Apex. So we're going to open up the developer console, and you can open that directly in Salesforce by just going to the cog and then clicking developer console. One pro tip I will mention is if you have your window expanded, it will open in the same tab as opposed to a brand new window, which is a little bit annoying. So I'm going to go up to File, click Open, and then I'm going to open up the case trigger because we're triggering the process builder on case, so we want to do the same thing for the trigger. And the first thing I'm going to mention, especially to people that do write code, I'm immediately not using a best practice in this trigger, which is I'm putting all the logic for what I'm trying to do directly in the trigger. So if you were doing this according to best practice and not in a demo for people who are just learning code, you would use a trigger handler for all your business logic, and then you would just call that from directly in the trigger. But again, because we're doing this, we have just a few minutes. It's all in here. So I'm saying this first line, I'm declaring that this is the trigger on case, and this is going to happen after insert, so after the case is created. So it's similar to the very beginning of the process builder. Oh, wait, I actually have a diagram that I'm going to go through first to show you how this is not as crazy as it looks. So let me just go to that first. Go back to my slides. So I'm just going to talk through, before we look at the code, just on a very high level what we're going to be doing. So then when we look at the code like we just did already, it's not as overwhelming. So the trigger is going to be listening for cases being created. And then we're going to use this trigger.new, which is all the cases that have just been created. And the reason I keep using plural is because there could be more than one case. There could be a data load that you've inserted a bunch of cases at once. There could be an integration that's feeding cases into Salesforce, so it could be more than one case. So we always kind of need to think of that behavior. Then the trigger needs to get information to create these tasks that isn't on the case. So it needs information from the toy, like the owner of the toy and the toy name. And then we need to figure out what toys it needs information about. So the case that we're going to create is just one case, and it's going to be related to Skip It. So we need information about the particular toy, like the toy owner, et cetera. So then we're going to get the information about the toys. Then finally, we're going to create the tasks with information from both the case, the toy, and the task. And then finally, the last thing we're going to do is insert those records into Salesforce. So that's our end goal. So let's go back to the code now that we've gotten a little bit of an overview. So the first thing we're going to do is create a list. We're going to declare a collection to create all of these tasks. And we'll get into a little more later about why we've created a list. And next, what we're going to do is create a set, which in Apex is a way to have a unique list of variables. So you would want IDs to be in a set because let's say somebody uploaded like a list of cases rather, and there were duplicates in there, you wouldn't want this to run twice. You would just want it to run once. So that's why we're using a set here. I'm going to skip ahead now, and we're going to look at the next thing we're creating. And again, if this is a bit overwhelming, it's it's okay. I don't expect everyone to understand this round one, but just to give you an overview of some of Apex concepts. The next thing we're going to do is create a map. And we're going to use the IDs from our set here, and we're going to match those to a record. So a map is a way to have a key, which in this case is the ID, to a value, which in this case is the toy record itself. So we're going to declare this new map, and then we're going to get information using SOCL, which is Salesforce Object Query Language, which is, I like to think of it as sort of similar to Report Builder, where you're getting information about a particular object. So we're saying we want to get the ID, the name, and the owner ID from the toy record. And then we're saying where, so it's sort of our filter criteria, where the ID is in this list of IDs of toys that we've already sort of gathered. So we need to get information so that when we're creating this task, we have information about the toy record because it's not directly on the case itself. So the next thing we're going to do, I think this part, if you've looked at the process builder that we just created, looks really similar to where we're creating that task record. So we're using a loop for, if you've used flows before, you know that it's a way to like do the same thing with a set of records again and again. So we're doing it for each case. We're creating a new task. So we're using, again, this just the cases created in this that have fired this trigger to begin with. And we're going to only do this if there's a related toy record. And then we're going to create a new task record. And then we're going to go down here and declare all of these fields on the task itself. So we're using information from our map for the name and the owner ID. We're setting values in the same way that we did in Process Builder for actually just things on the task itself. And then here we're using a method, which in Apex is kind of like an action, something you're doing actively. And we used this in the Process Builder too, where we just wanted to add 3 days to the due date for that owner. And then the last thing we're doing is adding this task to the list that we created at the very beginning. And the reason that we're adding these to a list is for SOCL and at the very end where we're inserting these into Salesforce, we have limits on how many SOCL queries or DML statements we can do per Apex transaction. So if you think about it, we want to use a list here because if we put all of the tasks we're creating in one list and we insert it into Salesforce at the very end, we only use one DML statement, whereas if we did it every time, we would use one for every time it looped, and you might get an error saying you've used all of your DML statements. So up until the very end of this, we've just done this in our code. The DML statement, which stands for Database Manipulation Language, is kind of, I like to think of it as like the things that data loader does in your code. So if you don't have that, you're going to just do all of this in your code, but you don't actually do the action at the end that you would want to create these tasks in Salesforce. So let us now look at, oops, just want to, I struggle with having things full screen. I know that it's like best practice in a demo, but I struggle with it. So we're going to create a case related to this toy. Now that we've done it in both Process Builder and our code, and both of them are active. So we're expecting a task to be created from the Process Builder and a task to be created from the trigger. And this isn't really showing something that you can't do in configuration, but it's kind of just showing you can do it in both ways. So we're going to say case origin web, and then we're going to put in Micah. We're going to say help. Hello there. I broke my foot on your toy. Please compensate me. Okay, we're going to save that now. And then when we look at this case that was created, we can see that both our process builder and our trigger both did the exact same thing. They created a task. So now let's go back to our slides. Okay, so hopefully that was not too overwhelming and has kind of given you a quick sort of intro to Apex, which is, I think, pretty hard to do in 20 minutes, but kind of to draw the parallels between both. So I would say that learning new skills is really, really challenging. When I was doing the Rad Women course, I would get really frustrated and sort of feel like, oh, I'm never going to learn this. But I think the times that you really do struggle and you really struggle with understanding a concept is when you're really going to learn it well. I would also say asking for help is really positive. If you work with people who write code, or you ever want to feel empowered to go to a developer user group, there's people there and people in the Trailblazer community who are really keen to kind of get you up to speed with code. And then finally, I think it's okay to do research. So I found that when I was first learning code, and I'm still very much on this journey, I would feel really bad when I was looking at people's code samples, and I would feel like I was cheating. But if you kind of think about it and take a step back, there's really no way that you can learn how to code just like magically in your brain without looking at examples. It's the same as if you were struggling with a validation rule and you looked at what someone had solved on the Trailblazer community. You got inspiration from that. That's totally acceptable with code too, and it's not cheating. And then finally, I think this is the one I've struggled with the most, is there's not one way to be a developer. I don't think there is like, it's not like an entire identity of like, these people are developers, these people aren't developers. I think it's a skill you can learn, and it's something that's definitely attainable for people, whether you write code in your day-to-day job every day, or you know how to read code, or you understand what code solutions are. There's a lot of different ways to sort of have that be part of your career. And because I've gone over a lot of material in a very, very short period of time, I wanted to give you guys some resources and mention that I just really like these Legos. I have 3 of them, but not all 4, so that's very hard for me. So I created a trail mix for people to check out, and I think sometimes I've found with some of the Trailhead modules, if you don't completely understand how to write the solution, even just like seeing how someone else has solved it can be really helpful to your own learning. And I think if you're hitting a roadblock, it's okay to look what other people have done. It's totally acceptable when you're still learning. Women Code Heroes is a really great blog that Kieran Jameson writes. And I think she writes in a really relatable and easy to understand way. And she's one of the women who founded Rad Women Code. SFDC 99 is a really great resource from David Liu, who started his career as an admin and now works as a developer. And a lot of people really love his stuff. The Rad Women program is a great program. I think it's run twice a year. It's free. And I think you just need to attend an intro webinar, and then you can get set up with that. Sometimes it does fill up. It's a lottery system, but just get your interest in there, and you should get in at some point. And then finally, I will throw in the Apex Developer Guide, which until very recently I was very intimidated by. But it is the source of where you learn about Apex. So I would definitely say that don't be intimidated by it. You don't need to understand everything the first round, but it's a really good resource, and it doesn't mean that you can't read it if you don't understand everything. So yeah, maybe we have time for questions, or maybe we don't. But yeah.
I've been an admin for a couple of years,
Mm-hmm.
still sort of studying, and I work with developers, and you've just shown a process that can be done through configuration and code.
Yeah.
The problem I have is where I'm still learning, what I have learned through the exams, I think it's possible to configure, but the moment I go into a developer, their response is always, let's code it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not really learning because the response is usually it's more fun to code than to configure. Where's the line? Like, where can you, as a, not an experienced admin, when do I know if I'm being lied to?
I definitely think that sometimes it is someone's personal preference. Like, I work with a lot of developers day to day, and some people, I think, really believe in the clicks over code, and even if they have the ability to do things with code, they will try to use the configuration option. So I think the more comfortable you get with all the configuration options, the more I think you'll be able to say, actually, I could do that with Flow, or actually, I could do that with Process Builder. I know there's this new feature where I can, submit for approval or whatever. I think that it probably just takes time before you know. But I think sometimes I still struggle with this where you just don't know, and you do need to do a little bit of research. So I think it's taking the time to do that research, and then, or even asking other people who work as admins, like, hey, is this possible? And you'll get that confidence to be able to make that differentiation. I think it just takes experience and research. Yeah, but no, I get that. Any other questions? Yeah.
So how difficult is it to write the test classes?
So that is something I haven't done that much of, to be honest. I think that it's something that is really important to Apex, but I think it's like something I haven't done a lot of in my day-to-day job. But I think it's really important to write the test classes. It's something you have to do. So I think it's like a stepping stone. So like once you've been able to write a class, then writing the test classes is another skill set. So is that? Yeah, that's correct. So you need to have, 75% code coverage and some coverage on triggers.
I just got one other question about
Yeah.
in your code, you were like looking at the toys.
Yeah.
So in terms of, so obviously a case is created, but the first thing your trigger does on writes is looks at all the ID for all the toys.
So this is just related to the toys related to the cases that started the trigger.
Okay.
So the new cases that fired the trigger originally.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it's a lot. I think I tried to use a really simple example, but it still is, it's really complicated compared to the process builder, so I get that. Any other questions? No? Okay, thanks so much, everyone.
Capado separates user stories into individual feature branches in your code repository. This makes it easy to deploy code into multiple environments without having to worry about other developers' changes being introduced accidentally. Capado also automates the process of doing a pull request, making it easy to compare code from one environment to the other.
Earlier, with chain sets, adding metadata components used to take time. But with Capado, it has become easy and quick, because it provides ability to search, filter by type, last modified by, created date, etc. Also, it has ability to integrate with Jira, Git, Bitbucket, making it powerful and providing traceability for our changes.
As a release manager at MassMutual, the great benefits I see are it helps us to bundle multiple user stories across a team and deploy in one go, which saves a lot of release time. But in chain sets, we have to deploy user stories individually. With chain sets, developer can skip environments while deployment, but with Capado, we have a set deployment flow between the environment. Capado comes with a great reports and dashboard, which helps us to track and org level metadata changes.
When I joined MassMutual approximately a year ago, we had a team size of around 50. Now, over the last year, we've increased probably about twofold, and we've gone over 100 people for this team. Bringing in Capado was one of our best decisions. Not only was it a scalable solution with delivery with high confidence, but it also introduces and integrates the QA piece, establishing a CI/CD pipeline that every company really wants in today's day. They have given us professional support. They have given us innovative solutions. They have really worked with us hand in hand closely to make it a success story for us.
What some people may not realize is that MassMutual has been on Salesforce now for many years. As we leaned into our digital transformation, this presented both a challenge and an automation. This presented both a challenge and an opportunity in terms of maturing our release management practice. I'm actually very pleased with both the features and the partnership Capado has offered. We've achieved a number of short-term wins, and I'm now more confident about our future ability to scale our DevOps practices here at MassMutual.